The colony world of Vera was not known for comfort. Its air was heavy with dust and its two suns burned the land during the day before freezing winds rolled in at night. Human settlers rarely stayed long, but many traders passed through. The alien races who lived there had built crowded market streets filled with strange smells, bright fabrics, and loud voices that mixed together until everything became a blur of color and sound. Daniel, a human traveler, walked through those streets, with his bag slung across his shoulder. His ship had broken down outside the colony, one of its main engines refusing to restart no matter how many times he tried. He had patched things together before, but this time it was different. He needed supplies, tools, and maybe even someone who understood the local technology. That was why he had come into the market, even though humans were not always welcome here. He spoke quietly to himself, checking the small device in his hand. Power core is fine. Circuits burned out. Maybe a replacement node will work. His voice was steady, low, and calm. He did not notice that someone nearby had suddenly stopped walking. Among the crowd, a young alien girl stood still. Her race was known as the Falari, feline-like beings with sharp ears, long tails, and eyes that glowed faintly under the suns. This girl, Lyra, had been carrying a basket of fruit from her family's stall. She had heard many human voices before, since traders often came here, but this voice was different. When Daniel spoke, Lyra felt something deep inside her stir. Her ears twitched without her permission, her tail froze, and her breath caught in her throat. She turned her head, searching the crowd until her eyes landed on the tall human moving calmly between stalls. The sound of his words, even though they were not directed at her, had struck her instincts like a spark to dry leaves. She didn't understand why, but her body reacted as if she had just heard something ancient and familiar. Daniel noticed her staring. At first, he thought she was just another curious local watching an outsider. He gave her a small nod, polite and cautious. "Excuse me," he said, pointing to the vendor behind her. "Do you know if this stall sells circuit nodes?" Lyra blinked, trying to steady herself. The moment he spoke to her, the reaction grew stronger. Her chest tightened, her heart beat faster, and her claws pressed against the basket she held. His voice was not commanding, not loud, not forceful. It was simply resonant. Each word seemed to echo through her bones. She quickly lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "The stall sells food," she replied softly. Her voice came out sharper than she wanted. "Not parts." Daniel gave a polite smile. "Thanks." He moved on, unaware that his words had shaken her world, but Lyra couldn't move. She stood frozen, her basket nearly slipping from her hands. Something inside her mind whispered warnings. The old stories of her people spoke of rare voices that could awaken instinctual bonds in a Falari. It was said that those who heard such a voice would feel pulled toward its source, unable to ignore it. But that was just myth, wasn't it? Legends told by elders to explain strange feelings. Surely a human could not have that effect. And yet, as Daniel disappeared deeper into the market, her body moved before her thoughts could catch up. She followed him. Daniel stopped at a mechanic's stall, looking over rows of parts. He picked up a small device and asked the seller a few questions. Lyra stood at a distance, pretending to look at jewelry from another booth. But her ears kept twitching every time he spoke. She could hear his voice clearly even when others around him shouted and bargained. Her instincts kept drawing her attention back to him. She tried to reason with herself. "I should go back. I need to return the fruit to my family." But her legs stayed rooted. The pull was too strong. She had never felt like this before, not around her people, not around anyone. It frightened her. Daniel, meanwhile, paid for a handful of tools. His credits were running low and he knew he had to fix his ship quickly before he ran out of money. He sighed and muttered under his breath, "If this doesn't work, I'll be stuck here for weeks." Lyra's claws dug lightly into her palm when she heard those words. That small sigh, the tone of quiet frustration, it sank into her instincts again. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Why did it matter so much to her that he sounded worried? Why did her chest ache at the thought of him leaving, or staying without help? When Daniel turned to leave, she followed once more. By the time Daniel reached the edge of the market, the suns were beginning to set. Long shadows stretched across the dusty road leading back to the landing fields. He stopped to check his supplies, placing them back into his bag. That was when he noticed movement in the corner of his eye. The same alien girl from earlier was standing a few steps behind him, pretending to look at nothing in particular. He frowned slightly. "Are you following me?" he asked in a calm voice. Lyra's ears twitched, and her tail swished nervously. The way he asked, not angry, not accusing, but simply curious, made her chest tighten again. She looked away quickly. "No," she said too fast. "I was just walking." Daniel tilted his head. He could tell she was lying, but she seemed harmless. Her eyes darted everywhere but at him, and her claws tapped lightly against the basket she still carried. She looked more nervous than dangerous. "Well, careful out here," he said kindly. "Some parts of the colony aren't safe after dark." He adjusted his bag and began walking again. Lyra stood frozen, his voice, gentle, steady, protective, wrapped around her senses like a net. She wanted to walk away, to return home, to forget this strange pull. But her instincts screamed the opposite. With her heart pounding, she took a deep breath and followed him once more, staying in the shadows. As Daniel reached the outskirts of the landing field, his small ship came into view. It was battered and dusty, resting on its landing struts with panels open on the side. He sighed, setting down his bag and kneeling beside the engine compartment. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see if I can bring you back to life." From behind a nearby rock, Lyra crouched low, her tail wrapped tightly around her legs. She watched him work, her golden eyes reflecting the last light of the setting suns. Every time he spoke, to himself, to the ship, even in quiet grumbles, her body reacted. She could not explain it. Her instincts told her one thing clearly: she could not ignore him. As the night winds began to rise, she stayed hidden, watching, listening, and waiting. And Daniel, still unaware of the bond that had just awakened, continued working under the fading light, never realizing that his voice had already changed the course of both their lives. The night winds howled over the landing fields of Vera, carrying dust and the faint smell of metal from grounded ships. Daniel sat on the ground beside his small, battered craft, a wrench in one hand and a flashlight in the other. The panel was open, wires spread like tangled vines. He worked with quiet patience, muttering under his breath as he tested one circuit after another. From the shadows, Lyra crouched, her golden eyes following every movement. She told herself she would only stay for a moment, long enough to prove that her instincts were wrong, but minutes stretched into hours, and still, she did not leave. Every sound of his voice pulled her tighter into a web she couldn't escape. When Daniel finally sat back and rubbed his forehead, he sighed. "Nothing's working. I'll need more than spare parts this time." His words were not loud, but they carried clearly through the empty field. Lyra's ears twitched. The sound struck her chest with a strange warmth. She swallowed hard, pressing, her claws lightly into her palms. She knew she should go home. Her family would wonder where she was, but leaving felt impossible. At last, Daniel turned, and his eyes caught movement in the darkness. His hand went to his tool belt instinctively, but when the figure stepped into the faint light, he relaxed slightly. It was the alien girl from the market, the one who had been watching him. "You again," Daniel said, his voice calm but curious. "You followed me all the way here?" Lyra froze, clutching her basket. Her tail flicked nervously. She wanted to deny it, but her throat refused to form the lie. I heard you were in trouble," she whispered, her ears lowering. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Trouble? It's just a broken ship. Happens all the time." He smiled faintly, trying to ease her nerves. "You don't need to worry about me." But her instincts did not agree. The tone of his voice made her heart beat faster. She stepped closer despite herself. "Your voice," she said before she could stop the words. Then she snapped her mouth shut, embarrassed. Daniel blinked. "My voice." Lyra's tail curled tightly around her legs. It sounds different. She turned her eyes away, heat rising in her cheeks. I don't know why. Daniel tilted his head, studying her. She was clearly uncomfortable, but she wasn't dangerous. In fact, she looked like she was fighting some inner battle. Well, he said gently, I don't mean to cause trouble for you. If I sound strange, maybe it's just the translator implant making things fuzzy. Lyra shook her head quickly. No, it's not that. She bit her lip, struggling with words. Her people rarely spoke about instincts openly, especially with outsiders. But hiding it seemed impossible. Every time he spoke, it was like the sound, wrapped around her thoughts, pulling her closer. Daniel decided not to press her. Instead, he stood and stretched. Look, I appreciate the concern, but it's late. You should probably head back before your family worries. She hesitated, her claws gripping the basket. The logical part of her mind agreed, but her instincts screamed the opposite. Walking away felt like stepping into a storm without shelter. Finally, she blurted, I'll stay. Daniel frowned slightly. Stay? Out here? It's freezing at night. I don't care, she said quickly, almost too quickly. Then she lowered her gaze, embarrassed by her own boldness. I'll just watch. You don't have to talk to me. Daniel studied her again. Something about the way she spoke told him she wasn't lying. She really intended to stay, even if it made no sense. He sighed. All right, just don't get too close to the ship while I'm working. Lyra nodded, relief flooding her chest. She sat on a nearby rock, hugging her. Basket close, hours passed. Daniel worked on the ship, testing connections and tightening bolts. Sometimes he muttered instructions to himself. Check stabilizer, reroute the power flow, careful with the fuse. Each word reached Lyra like a soft drumbeat. She didn't understand the mechanics, but she understood how his voice made her feel. Steady, calm, safe. Her people often said instincts were a gift, guiding them to trust or fear, to fight or protect. But this was unlike anything she had known. It wasn't fear. It wasn't danger. It was pull, an unshakable pull toward him. Finally, Daniel set down his tools and leaned back against the ship. That's enough for tonight, he said with a tired sigh. Lyra stood quickly, her tail flicking. Did you fix it? Not yet, Daniel admitted. But I've got a plan. He glanced at her. You're still here. She looked away, her ears burning. Yes. Daniel chuckled softly. You're a strange one. Lyra stiffened, unsure if it was an insult. But when she looked back, his smile was kind. Not mocking, simply amused. For some reason, that smile made her chest feel lighter. The next morning, the suns rose over Vera, painting the sky in gold and red. Daniel packed his bag again, preparing to return to the market. To his surprise, Lyra was still nearby, sitting, quietly as if she had been waiting. You didn't go home? He asked, raising an eyebrow. I did, she said quickly. But I came back. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. He wasn't sure what to do with her. She seemed determined to follow him, though he couldn't guess why. Finally, he decided it was better to accept her company than to argue. All right then. If you're coming with me, you might as well help carry something. Her ears perked. She stepped forward eagerly, taking a small toolkit from his hands. The moment his voice gave her that simple instruction, her chest tightened. Again. Obedience wasn't in her nature. Falari were proud, independent. But when he asked, it felt natural to agree. As they walked through the dusty streets together, others began to notice. Falari merchants glanced at Lyra, whispering to one another. A young girl carrying tools for a human traveler. It was unusual, even suspicious. Lyra ignored the stares, but Daniel could feel the tension growing around them. He leaned closer and whispered, Are people going to be upset you're with me? Lyra's tail swished nervously. Yes. Then why stay? She didn't answer, at first. Then softly she said, Because I can't not stay. Daniel slowed his steps, the weight of her words settling on him. He didn't understand what she meant, but he could see the truth in her eyes. She wasn't joking. Something deep inside her truly bound her to him. By midday, they reached another row of stalls selling spare parts. Daniel spoke with the vendors, asking questions, bargaining, and checking prices. Lyra stood close, clutching the toolkit. Every time he spoke, she felt her body respond again. The sound of his words seemed to push away the noise of the market, making his voice the only thing that mattered. One vendor, a gruff alien with thick scales, frowned at Daniel. "Humans should not meddle in Filari matters," he said, his tone sharp. His eyes flicked toward Lyra. "Your presence is already causing trouble." Lyra stiffened. She expected Daniel to argue, but instead he simply said, "I'm just fixing my ship. I didn't mean to cause problems." His voice was calm, steady, respectful. That calmness disarmed the vendor, who grumbled but turned away. Lyra's claws dug lightly into her palms. She had expected to defend him, but his words had already smoothed the tension. She realized then that his voice didn't only affect her. It carried a strange weight, a steadiness that even others could not easily ignore. When they finally returned to the landing field, Daniel set his new supplies down and began working again. Lyra stayed at his side, passing him tools when he asked. Each request spoken in that calm voice tightened the strange bond inside her. As the suns lowered once more, she knew the truth she had been trying to deny. The old legends were real. His voice had awakened something ancient within her, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not ignore him. The suns of Vera hung high in the sky when Lyra returned home that day. Her tail drooped low, and her basket was empty. She had spent the morning following Daniel instead of helping at her family's stall. The marketplace had already filled with voices and scents, but Lyra moved quietly, slipping through the side paths until she reached her clan's dwelling. The Filari clan homes were carved from stone and decorated with banners of red and gold. Inside, her mother waited with folded arms and sharp eyes. "Lyra," she said firmly, "where have you been?" Lyra froze. She had never been good at lying, and the warmth in her chest whenever Daniel spoke made it even harder to keep secrets. "I was at the market," she answered weakly. Her mother narrowed her eyes. "With who?" Lyra hesitated, her ears lowered. "A traveler," she admitted. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, her mother's tail lashed behind her. "A human." It was not a question. Lyra's claws curled into her palms. "Yes." Within hours, whispers spread across the clan. A young Filari girl seen carrying tools for a human. A girl seen walking beside him, lingering close as though bound. By evening, the elders had called for her. The council chamber was lit by torches, their flames flickering against the stone walls. At the center sat 3 elders, their fur streaked with gray, their golden eyes sharp. They had led the clan for many seasons, protecting its traditions and guiding its young. Lyra stood before them, her tail low, her ears flattened. Her heart pounded in her chest. "Lyra," the eldest said, his voice deep and steady. "We have heard troubling reports. You follow a human traveler, you obey his words, explain yourself." Lyra's throat felt dry. She wanted to deny it, but the memory of Daniel's voice filled her mind. The way it steadied her, the way it pulled her closer. She could not lie about it. "It is true," she whispered. Murmurs filled the chamber. The second elder leaned forward. "Do you understand what this means? The stories of our people speak of rare voices that awaken instinct, bonds we do not choose. You would let yourself be ruled by an outsider?" Lyra's claws dug into her palms. "He does not rule me. He does not even know what is happening. But when he speaks, I cannot ignore it. My body listens, even when my mind does not want to." The elders exchanged grim looks. The third elder spoke coldly. "Then you must cut the bond. Stay away from him. If you continue, you endanger the balance of our clan. We cannot allow old instincts to tie us to a human. They bring only change and chaos." Lyra lifted her head, her eyes burning with quiet fire. You speak of choice, but I have no choice. My instincts, they won't let me walk away. The eldest slammed his staff against the ground. Then you must learn to fight those instincts. If you do not, you shame your people. That night, Lyra slipped out of her home and returned to the landing field. Daniel was already working under the pale light of the moons, his hands deep in the engine's wiring. When he saw her, he shook his head with a tired smile. You again? I thought you'd give up on me by now. Lyra's chest tightened at his words. I can't, she whispered. Daniel frowned, setting down his tools. What do you mean you can't? Her tail flicked nervously. She wanted to explain, but fear of the elder's anger pressed against her mind. Still, the truth pushed harder. My people say some voices awaken something inside us. Instincts we cannot control. When you speak it happens to me. Daniel blinked, caught off guard. My voice does that? Lyra nodded, her ears low. The elders say I should cut the bond, but I can't. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. He had expected many challenges on his travels. Broken ships, hostile markets, even bandits. But he had never expected this. An alien girl tied to him by some instinct he couldn't even see. Lyra, he said carefully, I never wanted to cause you trouble. If my voice is doing something, maybe it's better if we stay apart. The moment he spoke those words, her body trembled. It felt like being torn in two. Her claws pressed into the ground. No, she said quickly, almost desperately. Don't say that. Daniel looked at her, surprised by the intensity in her eyes. She was trembling, but her voice carried determination. If you tell me to leave, I will hear you. But I don't want to leave. I want to stay. Daniel sighed, realizing the weight of her struggle. He sat down on the ground, motioning for her to sit as well. All right. Then tell me this. Why? Why stay, even if it means fighting your own people? Lyra sat across from him, hugging her knees. She stared at the ground for a long moment, then she whispered, Because when you speak, I feel safe. I feel like the world is less heavy. My instincts tell me you are someone I should not lose. Daniel's chest tightened. He wasn't sure what to say. He didn't understand her instincts, but he understood loneliness, fear, and the need for connection. Maybe this bond wasn't so different from what humans felt in their own way. The next day, the conflict became unavoidable. As Daniel and Lyra walked through the market, a group of Falari approached. Their leader, a tall warrior with golden fur, pointed a claw at Daniel. You will release her, he growled. You have bound one of ours with your voice. We will not allow it. Daniel raised his hands calmly. I didn't bind anyone. I don't even understand what's happening. Lyra stepped forward quickly. It is not his fault. It is my choice to stay with him. The warrior's eyes narrowed. Your choice or your weakness? You shame your clan, Lyra. You put us all at risk. A crowd gathered. Falari voices murmured in disapproval, some angry, some fearful. Daniel felt the tension rise around them like a storm. He wanted to step back to avoid the fight, but Lyra stood firm at his side. Enough, she said, her voice trembling but strong. I will not leave him. You can punish me, but I will not break the bond. The warrior snarled, his tail lashing. Then you have chosen exile. Daniel's eyes widened. Exile? Wait. But the decision was already spoken. The elder's authority carried weight and the crowd accepted it. Lyra was cast out from her clan. That evening, Daniel sat beside his ship, his mind heavy with guilt. Lyra sat across from him, her tail curled tight around her body. For the first time, her eyes looked lost. I didn't mean for this to happen, Daniel said softly. Lyra shook her head. It was always going to happen. My instincts would not let me ignore you. The clan saw it as weakness, but I see it as truth. Daniel leaned back against the hull, staring at the sky. Then what now? Lyra looked at him, her eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Now, I stay with you, no matter what comes. And though the night was cold, Daniel felt the weight of her words. The bond was no longer a secret, no longer something they could hide. It had become a choice, one that tied both their fates together. The colony of Vera had always been dangerous, but until now, the threats were small. Bandits on the trade routes, petty thieves in the market, or the occasional fight between clans. But when the warning bells rang across the settlement, everyone knew something worse had come. Daniel was still working on his ship when the sound echoed through the dusty fields. A deep, hollow clang repeated again and again. Lyra's ears shot upright, her tail stiff. "Raiders," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel stood quickly. "Raiders?" "They come from the dunes," Lyra explained. "Outsiders who take what they want. They attack when the suns are low. The elders warned us they were near, but no one thought they would come so soon." Daniel looked toward the colony walls. Smoke was already rising in the distance, black against the golden sky. Shouts carried across the wind, followed by the sharp crack of weapons. He felt his stomach tighten. "We need to get to the colony," he said firmly. Lyra hesitated. Her clan had cast her out only yesterday. Returning now meant facing their scorn again. But as she looked at Daniel, her instincts gave her no doubt if he was going, she would follow. "Yes," she said quickly. "We go together." The colony was chaos when they arrived. Raiders had breached the outer gates, their speeders kicking up dust as they swept through the streets. They wore patched armor and carried scavenged weapons, firing wildly at anything in their path. Merchants fled from stalls, clutching children and valuables. The Falari warriors fought back, but they were outnumbered. Their claws and blades could not match the raiders' firepower. The elders shouted orders, but fear spread faster than courage. Daniel ducked behind a stone wall as a blast scorched the ground nearby. His heart pounded. He wasn't a soldier. He was an engineer, a traveler. But he couldn't stand by while people were cut down. He turned to Lyra, who crouched beside him, her eyes glowing with instinctive fury. "We can't fight them head on," Daniel said quickly. "But maybe we can slow them down. Defenses, traps, anything to even the odds." Lyra nodded, gripping her claws. "Tell me what to do." Daniel's mind raced. He scanned the street and spotted a power junction half buried under stone. If overloaded, it could release a shockwave strong enough to disable enemy speeders. He pulled a small tool from his bag and worked quickly, rerouting wires. "Cover me," he said without looking up. Lyra hissed softly, crouching low. When two raiders charged down the street, she leapt forward with a feral cry, slashing at one's weapon arm. The other swung at her, but Daniel's voice rang out. "Lyra, left!" The command was sharp, steady, clear. Her body reacted before her mind did. She spun left, avoiding the blow, and countered with a strike that sent the raider crashing to the ground. She looked back at Daniel, her chest burning. His voice had guided her again, instinct answering his call without hesitation. "Done," Daniel shouted, pulling the last wire. Sparks erupted from the junction, and the next wave of raiders charging down the street skidded as their speeders shorted out, crashing into each other. The Falari warriors nearby gasped, stunned by the sudden turn. One of the elders shouted, "The human did this!" Word spread quickly. Daniel's calm instructions, shouted through the chaos, began to carry weight. Falari fighters who had been panicked only moments before found themselves rallying around his voice. "Block the street." "With carts," Daniel called, and several obeyed, pushing heavy wagons into place to create barricades. "Keep the children in the temple, don't scatter," he shouted, and frightened families gathered together, safer in numbers. Every order was simple, clear, and confident. And every time he spoke, not only Lyra but others felt steadier. His voice cut through fear like a beacon in the storm. Lyra fought at his side with unmatched ferocity. Her instincts burned brighter now, every movement tied to the rhythm of his words. When he warned her, she dodged before danger struck. When he encouraged her, her strikes grew sharper. She was no longer fighting alone, she was fighting as part of something greater. The battle stretched into the night. Fires burned in the marketplace, lighting the streets in orange glow. Raiders tried to regroup, but Daniel's improvised defenses slowed them again and again. He redirected power lines to overload, turned water pumps into pressure cannons, and guided the Falari into formations that made their numbers count. Still, the enemy pressed hard. A group of raiders broke through near the council chamber, threatening the elders themselves. The Falari line faltered. Fear returned. Daniel stood tall on the steps of the chamber, his voice rising above the chaos. "Stand your ground. This is your home. Don't let them take it." The words echoed across the square. Even Lyra froze for a heartbeat, her instincts blazing so strongly that she could barely breathe. The warriors roared as one, charging forward with renewed strength. Lyra leapt beside Daniel, slashing at a raider who had aimed for him. Her movements were a blur of speed and instinct, her loyalty blazing brighter than the flames around them. The bond she felt no longer frightened her. It gave her strength. By dawn, the raiders were broken. Their speeders lay in ruins, their fighters scattered into the dunes. The colony streets were scarred, but the people still stood. Daniel leaned against the wall, exhausted. His hands were blackened with soot. His clothes torn, but his eyes were sharp. He had survived, and so had the colony. The elders approached, their expressions conflicted. They had watched the human rally their people, had seen their warriors obey his voice as if it carried more weight than their own. One of them spoke at last. "This is dangerous," he said. "A human should not command Falari." But another elder shook her head slowly. "And yet without him we would have fallen. His voice carries strength we cannot deny." Lyra stood proudly beside Daniel, her tail raised high. Her eyes burned with defiance as she faced the elders. "You cast me out. But his voice saved not only me, it saved all of you." The murmurs of the crowd grew louder. Falari warriors, merchants, and families all looked to Daniel now, respect clear in their eyes. Later, when the fires were out and the wounded cared for, Daniel sat at the edge of the landing field. Lyra sat close, her tail brushing against his arm. The colony had survived, but he knew this was only the beginning. "I didn't want this," Daniel admitted quietly. "I just wanted to fix my ship and leave." "But you stayed," Lyra said, softly. "You fought for us." "For me." Daniel looked at her. Her golden eyes glowed faintly in the early morning light. He realized then that the bond was not just her burden. Somehow his voice had tied them together. And maybe he didn't want to break that tie anymore. The colony of Vera was quiet after the battle. The smoke had cleared, though black scars marked the walls where fire had burned. Merchants returned to their stalls, repairing damage with tired hands. Children peeked from doorways, their wide eyes still holding fear from the night before. But beneath the silence, something had changed. Whispers filled the streets, not of loss, but of survival. Not of despair, but of the strange truth. A human's voice had guided the Falari through the storm. Daniel walked the streets slowly, his body weary from the fight. He had spent most of the morning repairing broken pumps and damaged power lines, doing what he could for the settlement. His ship still sat in the landing field, unfinished, but the urgency to leave had faded. The colony needed help, and for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he stayed. At his side walked Lyra. Her tail flicked lightly as she glanced at the people around them. Many still looked at her with suspicion, but others gave her nods of quiet respect. She had fought like a warrior beside Daniel, and her loyalty was no longer hidden. "They see us," she whispered. Daniel gave a small smile. Hard not to, after last night. Later that day, the elders called for a gathering in the council chamber. Every Falari who could walk came, filling the hall with murmurs. Daniel stood near the back at first, unsure if he was even welcome. But Lyra tugged him forward, her claws curling around his sleeve. At the front, the eldest elder raised his staff. His voice was steady, but his eyes were troubled. "The raiders are defeated. The colony stands, but the price of survival was change, and change is not easy for our people." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Another elder spoke, her tone sharp. The human's voice carried weight among us. Too much weight. Warriors obeyed him as though he were one of our own leaders. This cannot be ignored. But the third elder lifted her hand. Nor can we ignore that his voice saved us. Without his guidance, the raiders would have broken us. She looked at Daniel. You did not force our people. You gave them strength they had lost. Daniel shifted uncomfortably under their stares. I didn't come here to lead anyone. I only wanted to survive and help where I could. Lyra stepped forward boldly, her ears raised high. You call it danger, but I call it truth. His voice is not a chain, it is a light. My instincts awoke when I heard it, and I chose to follow it. And last night you all did too. The hall fell silent. The elders exchanged looks, but no one could deny her words. Finally, the eldest elder spoke again. Perhaps the legends of our ancestors were true, voices that awaken instinct, bonds that cannot be denied. He tapped his staff lightly on the floor. If so, then we must decide whether to reject this bond or accept it as part of who we are now. After the gathering, Daniel and Lyra walked out into the cool evening air. The suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and red. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel let out a slow breath. You stood against your whole clan for me, he said quietly. Even when they threatened exile. Lyra's tail brushed against his arm. I would stand again. My instincts may have awakened because of your voice, but my choice is my own. I choose to stay. Daniel looked at her. Really looked at her. The glow of the sunset reflected in her golden eyes, and for the first time, he felt something shift inside him too. He had traveled many worlds, met many faces, but none had ever stayed with him like this. You deserve better than exile, he said firmly. She shook her head. I have what I want. I have where I belong. That night, the colony celebrated survival. Fires burned in stone pits and food was shared among the people. Children laughed again, running between stalls. The wounds of the raid were still fresh, but hope had returned. Daniel sat among them, surprised to find himself welcomed. Falari warriors clapped him on the back, their sharp teeth showing in rare smiles. Merchants thanked him quietly for saving their families. Even the elders, though cautious, allowed him space among their people. Lyra sat close beside him, her tail curled around her legs. She watched the others carefully, but her body was relaxed in a way Daniel had not seen before. She no longer tried to hide her bond. When one young warrior approached and asked Daniel how he had thought of turning water pumps into weapons, Daniel laughed softly. Sometimes the right tools are already there. You just need to use them differently. The warrior nodded with respect. Lyra's ears twitched proudly. Every word he spoke carried calm strength, and not just for her anymore. She could see it in the faces of the others, the way they leaned in, the way their fear melted. His voice had become more than sound. It had become trust. Later, when the celebration faded and the fires dimmed, Daniel and Lyra walked back toward the landing field. The night air was cool, the moons casting silver light over the sand. Daniel looked at his ship, still damaged but no longer urgent to repair. I could leave once this is fixed, he said slowly. Lyra's ears lowered slightly, but she said, nothing. He turned to her. But maybe I don't want to. Not yet. Her eyes widened. You would stay? Daniel gave a small smile. I've been running from place to place for a long time. Always fixing, always moving on. Maybe it's time I stopped. Maybe it's time I listened to the people who need me, to the voice inside me too. Lyra's chest tightened, warmth flooding her. For the first time since her instincts had awakened, she didn't feel torn between choice and compulsion. She felt whole. You are not just my bond, she whispered. You are my choice. Daniel reached out and gently rested his hand against her shoulder. Then we'll face whatever comes. Together. In the weeks that followed, the colony rebuilt. Raiders avoided Vera now, wary of the strange resistance, they had faced. The Falari began to see Daniel not as an outsider, but as part of their survival. And wherever he went, Lyra was at his side, her instincts steady, her loyalty unshaken. The bond between them was no longer seen as weakness. It was strength, a bridge between human and Falari. A reminder that sometimes the smallest things, a voice, a word, a choice, could change the course of two lives and perhaps even the fate of a whole people. And though Daniel still worked on his ship, he no longer counted the days until it flew again. Because for the first time, he had found something worth staying for.